Great. Well, to honor everybody's time, and we know we have more folks coming, and we are going to record this, we are going to jump in, and we're really excited to talk about this topic around strategic scheduling. And in particular, today, we are going to talk about building mindsets, refining course offerings, and strategic communications. And we're really excited because this is also the launch of our ebook on this topic. And all of you in the audience will be receiving the ebook. We'll send that out to you within the next week. So it's a digital launch of the free ebook around strategic scheduling, which really does a deep dive into it. So some logistics as we get started. We are in Zoom webinar, so please raise your hand. It's a smaller group today. We are going to record this session and we will provide this on our website. We will also hopefully send it out to you so you can interact with us in two ways. Our team is monitoring, so you can raise your hand if you want to make sure that you can hear us. And then any questions, please, in the Q&A panel, make sure that that you follow up with those questions and let us know. And today we have a great team, so we will be tag teaming today. So my name is Stephen Gehring, the Chief Academic Officer in Residence at Able, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Lynn Owens and Carol Wright, outstanding educators coming to you from Memphis and coming to you from Texas. And they will be sharing around strategic scheduling and their work around strategic scheduling. And then we're going to end the webinar today hearing from some voices from the field and two outstanding leaders from Kelso School District, Lacey DeWert and Sherry Walker, who will be reacting to the contents of the webinar and sharing some of their leadership moves over the last few years around strategic scheduling. With that, we're going to jump in. So here's our agenda. We will start with a little bit of the why. I'll set the context for what is strategic scheduling and why is strategic scheduling really important. Then we'll hand it off to my colleagues who will be talking about two of the 7 phases around strategic scheduling, around building mindsets and refining course offerings and strategic communications. And then we'll end with the voices from the field. So let's jump in. Why strategic scheduling and why does this work matter? We've talked about this before if you've seen previous webinars, but as we go around the country, really talking about the shift for our students. So the students in our school right now have a different job landscape than maybe when we were students. And a lot of the jobs require some post-secondary. So we're not saying all students need to go to a 4-year college, but about almost 70% of the jobs across the country are projected to require some post-secondary certificates, trade school, technical school, 2-year, 4-year, some sort of advanced study. High school can no longer be the end destination. A lot of the jobs for high school individuals with a high school diploma, about 80% of those lost during the Great Recession, dried up and did not come back. This is a visual representation of that. So we lost about 6 million jobs at that time around 2010 for individuals with a high school diploma. And those jobs have never come back. That has been the fundamental shift in our nation's economy. And at the same time, there was this premium. Again, not all jobs require bachelor's degrees, but there was this big uptick for mid-skilled jobs, associate's degrees, some college, certificate, trade school. And there was a really large increase for individuals with a bachelor's degree or advanced education. So the economy really shifted. Students need something different. And at the same time, we're finding lots of disparity across the United States in terms of who's accessing post-secondary. We've made a lot of gains as a country for students over the last 40 years, for students from the lowest income brackets, but there's still a really large gap from wealthy families, and there's also a really large gap by race and ethnicity. So not all students are accessing advanced studies after high school, and it's at a time when students need advanced studies more than they ever have before. So really important time to make sure that all students and all families have access to this type of learning. So why strategic scheduling and what is strategic scheduling? I really like this quote when they were on the Survival Guide for Leaders, and they talked about the idea of technical scheduling or technical leadership. Lots of folks say we schedule, we do this every spring. We collect our course requests, we do this, and we acknowledge that yes, what we're talking about is something fundamentally totally different. This quote talks about driving a car. If you keep taking your car to the mechanic and you really need to step back and you really need to talk to your family members who are driving the car on why it keeps breaking down, that's the difference between strategic and technical scheduling. And this starts to break that down. A technical problem is an issue that has a really clear known solution you can solve. That's the logistics. Lots of us have those magnet boards in our office, or we have lots of expertise on creating a schedule. We're talking about something fundamentally different, making sure that every student, the adaptive challenge here is how do you make sure that every student leaving our schools, leaving our districts, is prepared for post-secondary options, a wide range of college and career choices and options. That is a total different type of leadership that requires different thinking. Again, here's technical scheduling. Oftentimes, technical scheduling is around high school graduation, making sure students meet all the district and state requirements. It's done in the spring. Oftentimes, administrators we find we work with aren't involved. It's passed off to a scheduling expert, maybe a counselor or a registrar down the hall, and very minimal student advisement. It's often done in large scale, hundreds of students coming to the theater, choosing their courses, getting everybody in their courses, and it's all done again late in the spring as a task that has to be done, but not really part of the strategic work. Strategic scheduling, the book that we're launching this week, is really about adaptive leadership. And it really puts scheduling at the heart of school improvement, saying this is a year-round process that takes the entire year to really solve and has multiple phases. It's not about high school graduation. It's not about compliance. That's important. Kids need a diploma, but it's really about preparing students for post-secondary. And that means shifting the thinking, all students having in-depth advising and assistance on navigating through the complex courses and offerings, making sure that all students and families are prepared past their high school endpoint for their post-secondary options. And that means you're looking at your data, your targeted recruitment, you're making sure that you have metrics you're tracking, you have a point of view. And I can share myself, I used to be really good at this for a number of years when I was an assistant principal. We were registering kids online in 1998. Kids would come on, they would choose their own periods and teachers. And when I finally realized, I had this really big epiphany, is I had no point of view. Kids were doing this really cool online college-like schedules where they had individual passwords, but it was all a technical task. And it's finally when I had this epiphany that, oh, I'm supposed to be really trying to accomplish something. And 80% of my budget is inside the people that we hire and the courses that we offer. And I need to have a point of view and some goals around which courses students are taking and making sure all students are college and career readiness. That was a huge shift in my career when I finally realized that. And I hadn't been doing that for a number of years. So the ebook that we're launching really dives into these 7 phases. And really talks about these as a year-long process. And the first 3 phases, which we're really briefly going to talk about phase 1, we have more webinars and more content to talk about that. Every single school district should start with an analysis of your data and goal setting, making sure that it's based in your data. But the 2 phases that we're going to talk about today is how do you build a mindset? It's really important that you shift what staff think is possible for students and what students are signing up for. If you don't shift students' mindsets about what they're requesting, you will not be able to move forward in that strategic scheduling by fundamentally shifting what's happening inside your schedule. And we're going to talk about how do you think about the courses you're offering and how do you communicate those to students and families? That's also a big shift. In future webinars, we'll talk about this additional content and big leadership moves around that. It's also in our ebook. The only 2 things I'm going to say about phase 1, we have additional content around that, but here's 2 recommendations for schools and districts. Every district should be tracking these 3 metrics. So you should be tracking, are students enrolling in post-secondary? You should know where every one of the students from your high school, your district is enrolling, who's enrolling. That's available through the National Student Clearinghouse. Are they coming back from a sophomore year if it's a multiple year program? And who's actually getting post-secondary degrees? Those are metrics that should be adopted. We recommend by your school board, tracked on a yearly basis, and used as part of program evaluation. The other thing that you should be tracking, and we'll spend almost all of our time talking about, is the courses students take. We have really good evidence, decades of research, and we have been tracking it with over 100,000 students who have moved on to post-secondary. The courses students take matter tremendously. And this recommendation from this organization is every single school and district should be working to increase the number of students who are taking rigorous and intense coursework, not just students who are volunteering. It should be an active part of your process. So that's really phase one. It should be grounded in data. You should be tracking it. You should have clear metrics and goals, and we'll have more content around that. We are going to move to phase two right now, and we're going to talk about a really important part of the process. How do you build a college and career mindset among students, staff, and families, and make sure that all families have the necessary information? And I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Lynn Owens, who will share some of her expertise around building a college and career mindset.
Thank you, Stephen. This content, this work is really important to me naturally. However, I am a mom of twin seniors. And so understanding that every course that they have taken, the teacher mindsets, the student mindsets, and our family's mindset is really important. And this quote by Gupta and Sampat really speaks to the fact that our teachers' mindsets drive our students' mindsets. The teacher mindset is the influencer. So when teachers look at, or school leaders look at scheduling as a technical process, that is going to have an impact on your student mindset, and they will also think of it as a technical mindset. As Stephen mentioned, we know that graduation requirements are very important, but this work is all about the post-secondary readiness of our students. Stephen, if you'll move the slide, please. And so as we're thinking about those mindsets, there's some key components, and I want to share this with you. Again, I am an educator and a mom also, but that staff mindset, this year, my son is taking 2 AP courses, and we started out not taking those courses, but he was so driven. He went to the counselor, he talked to the school leader. He did not leave a stone unturned. Even when he was denied for AP computer science, he was an advocate. So when all of these components are aligned, the staff, the student, and the family element is so important. We cannot overlook that. It has a direct correlation on post-secondary readiness. With that being said, there's some language that is very often used. And being a former elementary administrator, I often would listen to the conversations of students and teachers and learn the songs and all of the activities going on as I walked up and down the hallway. Well, being a administrator in a high school or middle school, there's still some language that you must be aware of that we hear all the time. All students don't need intense coursework. Had my son not had the mindset when the teacher told him, your schedule is already set, it's done, you don't need AP computer science, you have the credits you need to graduate, he would have turned and walked away. So know that there is some language that you will hear, and we have provided you with some quotes so that you can familiarize yourself with this language and understand the importance of the staff mindset as they speak this language. And lastly, we've done, I feel like, every college in the Mid-South, the South, and on the East Coast. And the one thing that we often have heard over and over is taking those stretch courses junior and senior year when students want to be a library assistant, or maybe leave campus a little bit early. They're driving, they have a little bit more freedom. Taking those stretch courses is just the through line to post-secondary readiness. And so that's one of the mindsets that students have to have, that mindset and that expectation that even though I'm a junior, I'm a senior, I've have these credits for graduation, really helping students to understand graduation requirements and post-secondary readiness, those are apples and oranges. And so building that mindset among staff, students, and the family is key. And lastly, we cannot overlook quality family and student advising. Very often, we want to work in isolation. This work cannot be done in isolation. Post-secondary readiness is a team effort, and it means that every family, regardless of zip code, regardless of any other barriers that may exist in that student's life, that every family has an opportunity and access to the advising. This is when we're going to start our strategic scheduling process. Here are the course offerings, and eliminating those barriers that will restrict students from being able to enroll in those classes. So having that clear communication through line and providing parents, regardless of their zip code, their background, their educational status, but providing them with the knowledge is key so that they may best support their student.
Thank you, Lynn.
You are most welcome.
Oh, this last one, I want to make sure we talk about this. Sorry.
Absolutely. And many, many times we know the importance of social emotional learning. However, I have heard over and over again, well, we're focusing on social emotional. The focus on social emotional and those stretch courses and all of the rigor, all of the post-secondary persistence that's needed, those go hand in hand. When we focus on one and not focus on the other, we do our students a disservice. And let me give you an example. Very often we think, well, we're doing relationship building. Perfect. Provide mentoring, provide students the opportunity to learn about different pathways and build those connections and networking. But with that being said, afford them the opportunity to be able to enroll in those classes so that they will do more than build relationships, because that is the way we have the impact to increase our post-secondary outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So that was a brief overview of phase 2 that Lynn talked about. And really that takes months. What she's talking about takes years. And you'll hear from the Kelso team, years of work to really unpack with staff and students and families, and to build the structures in place. And what Lynn covered in 10 minutes might take years, and you'll hear from the Kelso team. Phase 3 of strategic scheduling is really about thinking about the course refinement and the strategic communications. And I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Carol, who will talk about some of the work and the leadership moves associated with phase 3.
Thank you, Stephen and Lynn. So phase 3, how do we bring everything together? One of the things I want to focus on, the big idea as we look at this quote here, is all students can benefit. Each and every student on your campus can benefit from taking those stretch courses that Lynn mentioned, and specifically the historically disadvantaged students. Research has shown that students or historically disadvantaged students, typically their outcomes, college outcomes, are much better when they actually enroll and complete those stretch courses. So there are 3 key components of course refinement. Couple of the components are narrowing the curriculum, removing your barriers, as well as add courses. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to dig a little deeper into what that looks like in terms of how do we narrow our curriculum. We're not saying just go in and get rid of all of your courses, okay, when you narrow your curriculum. You can go to the next slide, Stephen. When you narrow your curriculum, what we want you to look at are, what are your course offerings? Okay. Do you have some course offerings that are potential barriers to students getting into other courses? Looking at the tiers of coursework, oftentimes we see tiers of coursework in the core subject areas where it really focuses on almost like you're tracking your students. And lastly, we want to evaluate our cross-credited coursework. So let's dig into the overall course offerings. So what we have here, this is an actual, the classes that you see here listed for math are actual math course titles with some schools that we've worked with previously, okay? In my past life, not with Able, but in my past life as an administrator. What you see here is a math pathway, okay? And we have the typical pathway usually is algebra, geometry, algebra 2, and so on. But off to the side, what we see is like a sustainable home design. We see math meets art. So students that left out of algebra 1 could either go into geometry, or they could go into math meets art, or they could go into math work habits. We're seeing these are distractors, as we would like to call them. So what we would advise schools to do, or the schedulers or admin team, is to really look at those course offering and remove some of those distractors and make a clearly defined pathway for your students to follow. Reducing or eliminating low levels of tier work. Here, what we're showing you are tiers. The question is, do we have too many tiers of coursework? What you see are different tiers of English coursework. And what often happens are you'll have like a low level, which is around integrated English, and students that start in English 9 reading would typically follow that path of English 10, integrated communications, and so on, which would not. The question is, would this tier of coursework prepare students for post-secondary education? Then you look at the next tier where we have regular English. That's an example of a course sequence, as well as the accelerated English. The questions what we would invite you all to ask yourself is, if students are completing these different pathways, each one of the pathways that we're offering on our campus, or tiers, not pathways, I'm sorry, are these tiers really and truly preparing our students for post-secondary education? Is there an opportunity to reduce and or eliminate, let's just say, the integrated English, and students are working more towards regular English or accelerated English? And lastly, evaluate and align your cross-credited coursework. Now, cross-credited coursework, an example of that would be, for example, you're offering a fabric design course. And within that fabric design course, students are able to get a math credit, a science credit, and a CTE credit. So students that enroll in fabric design, they're able to get 3 different credits that can count toward graduation and or prepare them for post-secondary education. But the question is it really math or is it really science? Are students really digging into math to where essentially they're going to get 3 different credits for, and I do not want to minimize fabric design because I understand I am not the best sewer and things like that, and designing, and we understand that it does involve some type of math. It does involve understanding the types of fabric that you're utilizing, but we encourage schools to really look at the curriculum. Does the curriculum align to what students are to be learning? And does it really align to students learning math? What type of math are we giving credit for? And what about science? Is this doing students a disservice if it's not of high quality? So really evaluate those cross-credited courseworks that you may be offering on your campus. All right, so here's an opportunity. we talk about eliminating additional courses, reducing the types of courses that you're offering. Another thing to consider is we have your district course catalog. Just because a course is available does not always mean you have to offer each and every course that's on your district course catalog. Now, if your district says you must offer it, of course, offer the course. But what we're simply saying is we want to focus on the depth of the courses instead of just the breadth. You can sometimes too many options can be slightly overwhelming for your students as well as staff members. So in summary, 4 things. We want to look at eliminating our excessive tiers of coursework. We want to ensure that our coursework is parallel to where students are still moving forward and not just stuck in one spot. We also want to ensure that we are removing and or revising courses that are not really aligned to post-secondary readiness. So if that course that you're offering, like the math and art, and I'm just using that as an example, it's not really preparing your students to be ready post-secondary. We recommend that you go back and look at courses like that. And lastly, evaluate and align your cross-credited coursework. Ensure that it is of high quality and that the credits that the students are actually receiving for taking those courses align to the curriculum and are still moving them towards post-secondary readiness. So on to removing those formal barriers of enrollment. And we're gonna go back and forth between formal and informal barriers. But in regards to formal barriers, those are things that when you look at so for example, we have accelerated English here. And for a student, in order for a student to be able to get into AP Language and Comp, the prerequisite is English 10 honors with a B or higher. So what happens to the student that wasn't really going back to SEL, motivated or confident to take that English 10 honors, but did really well in the on-level English 10 and wants to take that stretch course in AP Lang and Comp? That barrier of that prerequisite automatically takes that student out of being able to access that advanced course. So do you really need the barriers? Taking a look at the curriculum and understand, are the prerequisites necessary for students to enroll in the course? Some of the formal, like the common formal barriers that we would see in school systems are like, you got to have GPA requirements, which is what we just showed you. Recommendations, having a teacher recommendation. Now, I know most of us on this call have been educators before, and having to do a teacher recommendation, we understand can sometimes be subjective, or it's easier for teachers or others to say, well, maybe, or it might be a little too difficult, or you're taking too many AP courses. Maybe you don't need to take this course. Like Lynn said, the staff mindset, that's why it's very important that we audit our staff mindset and ensure that we're all pushing our students and encouraging our students to take those stretch courses, as well as signatures. We've all like thinking about checking out at the school or going around getting a bunch of different signatures. What teenager do we know that really wants to walk around the campus and get a bunch of signatures to be able to go into a course? It's much easier to just say, never mind, I'm not going to do that. And I'm gonna move on so I can make sure I'm staying on time. So in summary, in terms of removing those barriers, we want to remove those track courses, okay, especially if they're not aligned to post-secondary readiness. We also want to look at those prerequisites. Are those prerequisites necessary for a student to be successful in that advanced course? Then we also want to think about those informal barriers. Now, we talked about systemic plan, like we want to remove the prerequisite, but just because you move the prerequisite doesn't necessarily mean that students are going to enroll in a course. For example, you can say, hey, you have to have, at one of the previous campuses I worked at, we removed algebra as a prerequisite in order to get into a Principles of Engineering class, which was typically a freshman level course. What we were noticing were students that did not take algebra in 8th grade were not able to start on their CTE pathway because they needed to take algebra before they got into principles of engineering. However, when we made that change, the communication, we did not realize the informal barriers where students were like, well, I thought you had to have algebra. So sometimes you would have to go out and make sure that you're removing those informal barriers as well, to where students understand you have access to this course. Maybe that's going to classrooms, or that's going out and doing some active recruiting and marketing for your students to enroll in those courses. Lastly, I think, I think I'm done. Am I done? Yes. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Stephen.
Was it just me, or did everybody get kicked off? Hopefully it was just me. Sorry about that, Carol.
No, you're fine. You can move on to the last slide. I think we were pretty much summing up.
Great.
Yes, we were summing up just in terms of adding new courses into the curriculum, conduct an audit of your courses, which is what we just went through. What are the courses you're offering? Are there opportunities to offer additional courses or additional stretch courses? Ensuring that you can also decide to implement proven curriculum, which is like your Project Lead the Way, AP, IB, or Cambridge, or even dual enrollment, dual credit courses. And lastly, one thing we should not forget, although we want to increase the types of courses we're offering, we want to make sure that we're investing in the teachers and ensuring that teachers have efficient, effective, and proper training and professional development on the types of courses they will be teaching. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you so much. Sorry about the technical glitch. I'm going to stop the share there, and wanted to start with introducing Sherry Walker, who's the current principal of Kelso High School, and Lacey Dewart, who was the interim principal and works in the district office. Just any thoughts or reactions around strategic scheduling and those some of the content that really resonated about the work that you all have done over the last several years. Let you start with that question.
I think I was a administrator in a different district, and I came to Kelso 3 years ago. So when I came to Kelso, I found myself always asking, why do we do this here at the district? And a lot of my questions related to the ideas around encouraging more kids to access those most rigorous courses and removing the barriers that existed within the school system. So I was looking at the process from an outsider's perspective, and it led me to asking a lot of questions.
That is true. So Sherry and I onboarded at the same time. When I was the interim principal there, we hired Sherry as an assistant principal. So we were both new, but I was not new. I'm actually a graduate of that Kelso High School. So I've been a student there. I was a teacher there, assistant principal there, 1,000 other jobs, and had the opportunity to come back and be the interim principal for a year. So it was fun to have Sherry on board with me to ask those questions, because I grew up in that system. And so to have someone from go, why do you guys do that? Really slowed me down. And I think the other thing that really influenced the way that we got this process started there for me was we'd started AVID at our school and been an AVID elective teacher, and being able to advise and work with kids closely on that. I saw the impact of having that adult with a clear understanding of how the system worked to advise kids to get where they wanted to go. So when I slid into that interim role, it was really important to me that all kids got that. Like, we should not be having pockets of kids getting that kind of advising, that we had to create a system so that all kids had access to that kind of advising in a high school where we do not have an advisory period. So we had to build a system outside of an advisory period to make this work, and we have.
That's a perfect. Oh, go ahead, Sherry. Go ahead.
One thing that I would add, I come from a family of 7 children, and in my family, none of my siblings have gone to college, and I'm the only person in my family that went to college. So I personally have seen the impact of creating opportunity for college and how that affects the rest of your life. So I connect that to what Lacey's talking about around AVID, and I I'm trying to live that in the work that I lead at the school.
Awesome. That's a perfect transition. I love the personal stories. Lynn talked about engaging staff, and you all just talked about you don't have an advisory period built in. So one aspect of strategic scheduling that Lynn talked about was building those staff mindsets and finding ways for staff to interact with students to help guide them in the courses that they select. What professional development or structures did you all put in place to make some of those strategic scheduling changes at Kelso?
Well, I can talk about where we started and Sherry can talk about where they're at now. But, you know, that year that I came in, it was a dual conversation. At that time, our counselors carried the load. Our counselors did all the scheduling. They would call kids down by grade level. They'd call kids down by alphabet to the auditorium, to the library, and try and advise 30, 40 kids at a time to schedule. And from an outsider perspective, it's like it wasn't effective. We were spending an excessive amount of money in overload pay because our schedule was real clunky, right? And we were seeing just consistent gaps in kids accessing rigorous courses. Like we are graduating 300 plus seniors a year, yet we're only getting 15 kids into calculus, right? The math wasn't adding up. So the year that I was there, that was the conversation. I talked about the fact that kids in our community don't leave. They're going to be in our community regardless, and that we really need to think about what type of neighbor we want to create. And so that's how I attacked it, was who do we want to be our neighbor, right? And so trying to connect that to our staff. And then really, I knew, having taught there, what the gaps were with our teachers' understanding, but really that first question I asked our staff was, hey, I want you to do a turn and talk with your neighbor. How many credits does it take to graduate from Kelso High School, and in what subject areas? And that right there showed the gap to us, like, holy smokes, our teachers don't know this yet. So starting with that foundation of, hey, let's get you guys educated. Let's help you understand how you fit into this big system. That is where we started in year one. So it was really planning year one with our counselors in terms of how we were going to change how we forecasted with kids. We turned it back to teachers. We had teachers forecast as an extension of their fourth period. We trained teachers on what's in the course catalog, how to read a transcript, how to advise. Overall, I think the fear was our teachers, they felt they were going to mess it up. So we kept having to go back to teachers and you're not going to mess it up. You're going to be okay. There are other sets of eyes on this, but helping them understand course sequencing, right? If I take this, this is what I can take next. That was year one. Like, we're in year 3 now. And I just sat through Sherry's cabinet visit a couple of weeks ago, and it blew my mind where they're at now, because we've changed the way our school improvement teams work, which I'm gonna let Sherry take over at that point, because this has been the most powerful change I've seen in this building, was the way we structured our SIP team.
So while Lacey was there, I saw so much in myself in Lacey, and it gave me this hope for being able to lead at a school where I came in as an outsider. And I saw that the staff really care about kids. They really care about kids, and they want to make decisions that help them create opportunity for their future. So that next year, we took our whole staff, and we have 4 areas of our SIP goals. So we have freshman success, we have AVID UDL, we have the master schedule in high school and beyond plan, and then we have the tier 1 team. And every single certificated staff member is a part of one of those 4 teams. The work that our master schedule and high school and beyond plan team has done over these last 2 years has really been phenomenal. And they've taken ownership of examining the course catalog, examining the forecasting process. That team has trained all of our staff. So we dedicate our school-based professional development days, and we split it in half. Half is whole school and half is our SIP teams, work breakout teams. And for about 2 months solid, our whole staff training is dedicated to making sure that every staff member understands the forecasting process. They examine a student transcript. We walk everyone through the process of facilitating the forecasting process with students in their classroom. And for those students, those teachers who are a little uncomfortable with it, we match them with a partner. So if we have a brand new teacher, we have someone that's anxious about it, we don't let them do it alone. And we bring someone into the classroom with them. We spend about a week we have an alternated schedule. So we add a whole period onto the 4th period and shorten every other period just by 5 minutes. So we still see every class. in place of not having an advisory, that's how we created a schedule that would work for that.
I love the marriage, what Lynn was talking about, and then what Sherry and Lacey were putting into practice. 2 months of dedicated staff time built in. So Lynn talked about the why of staff mindset, and then you really got to hear what it actually takes to make that happen and to build up staff capacity. And I really want to echo, Kelso's staff really cares about kids, loves kids, forms really strong connections, and it's really providing the professional development so that you can have that kind of individualized guidance and instruction. So that's incredibly powerful. Please ask questions, or we're monitoring chat. So anybody ask questions. I'm going to shift a little bit. Carol was talking about your overall offerings. So one aspect of strategic scheduling is examining what are you offering and what choices are you providing students. Were there any changes in the course offerings that at Kelso, courses that you might have eliminated, new courses offered, efforts to expand numbers of sections? You talked about calculus as an example. How did you all do some of the work that Carol was talking about in terms of thinking about your offerings or marketing those to your students and families to try to increase enrollment?
I'll talk about the one that probably nearest and dearest in my heart. So I'm former high school chemistry teacher before I've gone off on this other route. And so one of the things we had in our science department is we're on a trimester. Okay. So when I say trimester, 2 trimesters is equivalent to 2 semesters, right? So on our trimester system, we offered integrated chemistry, which is 1 trimester, which satisfies grad requirement. We offered chemistry, which was 2 trimesters. And then we offered UW chemistry, which is also 2 trimesters. What we have done in terms of elimination is we took out chemistry. So our kids either take integrated chemistry, which satisfies the grad requirement, or they take UW. And just by making that elimination, we had 89 kids jump into UW that hadn't been there previously. Like, we took that option off the table. And what we know, it's the same teacher for us for chemistry in UW. He said the curriculum is practically the same. The material is the same. It just freaks kids out when they see University of Washington chemistry. So by taking chemistry off the table, they want to go college bound, they want to go into nursing, they want to go into whatever their post-secondary path is. We gave them the option of going to UW Chem, and our kids are being successful in it. It's been a neat evolution to see. But that was probably the one that was nearest and dearest to my heart. I know Sherry's got more on the table, and I think, Sherry, if you want to start with just even talking about what we've done with special education, I think that's been a big shift.
So the year I was here as an assistant principal, I was surprised at the amount of pull-out special education core content courses that will be being offered for students. So that my commitment was that full first year is, how do we change the mindset of people to get all of our students into general education classes and remove the option of just special education core content classes. And we have done really an exceptional job in the 2 years that we've been working on this to increase our enrollment for special education students in the core content areas. But that has required a lot of support. So teachers who were not used to having special education students in their classes felt inadequately prepared to support them. And we've really had to, that was why we connected UDL and AVID, because those 2 concepts align really well with supporting that inclusionary practice shift.
Love those examples of the inclusion, making sure all students have access, and some of the specific examples. Maybe last one, and well, again, if anybody has any from the audience, strategic scheduling is a big shift, thinking about it kind of as a year-long process at the center of school improvement. How has the administrative team at Kelso, at the district and the school, played a more active role? And what has shifted in your mind and approach as you have thought about it, maybe from earlier in your career to how you're leading now at the district or the school level around strategic scheduling?
I would say for me, when I had the opportunity to be interim, I'd never done master scheduling before. And as long as I could remember, it sat in our registrar counseling center. And so in cooperation with our superintendent, Mary Beth Tack, she's the one that really pushed, like, we have to get this back to the admin. And the way she explained it to me was, this is a multi-million-dollar company that we're running. And that as the leader of this building, like we had to have a hand in that. So for me, I had to learn a ton. I had to learn how to read Skyward reports. But then I was able to take our Skyward forecasting, recognize, heck, not even all our kids have forecasted yet, right? So I became a much more active participant in making sure that 100% of our kids forecasted. And it took a while. It was a change in practice. The practice had been, we're pretty close. And I was like, no, we got to get to 100%. We have to have every kid forecasted so we can build the absolute best schedule. So working with our counselors to get that information out there to get forecasted, it was the first time in a long time HR was impressed that we were actually ready to do our staffing meetings on time, because we had that information. So from a financial standpoint, I felt like I put our school and our district in a much better place because I had a handle on it. I knew how many sections of this I needed versus that. I knew who I needed to hire versus who I may need to reassign. That was a big shift for us. Something I wish I'd done better that Sherry's done really, really well is to really take the board, right, and go, okay, we need 15 sections of XYZ. And being strategic about where we place that. So I mean, kudos to her, because I know she's given up a couple spring breaks to sit there and stare at this math to figure out how do we get all the pieces to fit together. So I'll let you take over, Sherry, about what's our process been the last couple of years in building the schedule.
So that year that Lacey was interim, she did all of that groundwork. But the one thing that didn't shift in that year was the actual construction of the schedule. So that stayed in the counseling seat. And in partnership with Lacey and Mary Beth Pat, we made a hard, firm decision that change was going to happen when I took over. So I took over examining all of the forecasting data, determining how many sections of each course would need to exist, and then starting to try to balance how that would look in the big framework. And we removed the responsibility from the counselor. We're working to really try to align counseling practices with the ASCA model. Yep. And as an additional support of that realignment, where I did all of the pre-work around building that master schedule out. And Stephen was super helpful in helping me think about how do I create balance and move sections to ensure access and opportunity for as many kids as I could. On a trimester, it's very hard to do, but it was really helpful to get Stephen's feedback around, if you just made this little move, that creates this opening here. So I did all of that work myself as the principal. And then once I felt like I had a working rough draft, I brought our registrar in. And before we did that shift, I sent the registrar and the counseling secretary for training all last year to better understand how to construct a master schedule, because they had not ever done that.
And I want to also bring it back to what Lacey and Sherry were talking on the strategic work. They're talking about the technical aspects of what they did, which was really remarkable to watch. And also remember what Sherry was talking about, the months of work to prep staff, to reconfigure how that they were going to be advising students. That didn't just happen. That took a lot of planning by their ad team from the beginning of the school year all the way forward to get to that point where they were actually able to collect what Lacey said, 100% of their course requests, and then to start placing students in. That wouldn't have happened without all of that hard work at the front end. Don't see any questions. Anything, Lynn or Carol, that you want to follow up on that you heard from the team?
No, I just want to call out Kelso for their amazing work and for really digging in. And Sherry, your story is phenomenal, being, one of 7 to attend college, and then taking that as a pillar and supporting the students in this district with that. I totally applaud you and your efforts. You all have just simply done a stellar job.
Thank you.
Well, and I think I would add, it feels good, the work that we're doing, like the conversations we're having with kids, it feels different. There's kids that are taking classes that normally wouldn't. And the flip side of that is, Sherry's asked that our staff take ownership of, if you want to run a section of a course, you better have the kids to back it up. And by doing so, it's created much more marketing by our teachers, like that they're owning, like, hey, if I want kids to take this 4th year, whatever class, I need to go find those kids and I need to start those conversations. And that has helped a lot with teacher to kid relationship, right? Because this teacher is reaching out to all kids. They're selling it like that month before forecasting starts. They're selling that to kids. They're like, hey, when you guys forecast, if you really like this, you want to think about this class. It's been phenomenal to watch that grow, and it's empowered our staff so they can see how they fit into the system, right? And it's been really neat to watch. And I know we've added courses, as we were talking about, but the courses we've added, AP Spanish, aviation, right? Like we're adding those top-end courses for kids to excel and take rigorous work in, and not that tiered work of, hey, here's a less rigorous path. So we're providing opportunities that stretch kids.
I do have one follow-up from the audience. And this is open for anybody here, talking about BIPOC students and historically underserved students not accessing rigorous courses, and sometimes then going to post-secondary and taking on debt and not getting credit for those courses. And the question is what advice do you have for schools who want to provide multiple classes for the sake of having more options? And then how do we create a design for students to move in or out of the pathway if they change their mind? So how do we support students and how do they move in or out? So any thoughts from the group on that question from the audience?
One thing that jumps out to me in regards to how do we provide opportunity for students that want to move in and out of the pathway, I think that really speaks to just that marketing and going back to exposing the students to the different types of courses. One thing we did at my previous campus is we had a CTE night. Okay, where we highlighted everything about CTE, the different courses. We had students, we had their student organizations there, and really we did this for the incoming freshmen primarily. We had the incoming freshmen come over during the day. They were able to just rotate around and really get a good understanding of the types of courses that they would possibly be taking, as well as their parents. Involving the parents is key. So we often think that once kids get in high school, we can kind of take our hands off. And I learned that with my kids on sophomore in college. You really have to put your hands and really guide your high school students through the decisions that they're making. We also, but that doesn't always work. We do recognize that that does not always work. So we did add in we called it like a multi-dimensional pathway. And within that multi-dimensional pathway, students were able to, we call them dabblers, but they were able to essentially dabble across the pathways. That's an option that I would consider.
I'll share one I heard from Atlanta from an African-American principal there that just yesterday, or maybe it's 2 days ago now, I heard her talk. She said, one thing, we had really robust systems, she said, set up for struggling students in our school. So we knew if students were failing courses or off track that we had, she said, we never thought about students in our advanced courses accessing those systems. So she said, one big shift was we opened up those resources and those support structures that our school had really in place for struggling students and put them in place for all students, including students in these stretch courses. That made a big difference. The other big thing she said is she called every family where they were signing up, and she told the family, don't call me if your student wants out. What I want you to do, if your student is struggling, I want you to call, and here's the questions I want you to ask. What supports can you provide my son or my daughter to support them? So ask this question. Don't call to get out. Ask how we can support them, because she said, we're here to support your kids. So I really love that example of that principal saying, I called the families, I coached them on what to ask, and then we as a school stepped up and we opened up our resources and our support structures to all kids, not just struggling students in our school. And I really like that. So I'll share that as an example. Thank you so much to everyone. This was a really, really engaging conversation. We are going to release our ebook on strategic scheduling. We'll send that out. We're really excited about that. I want to thank my colleagues Lynn and Carol and Kelso for being so vulnerable. They've done remarkable work. I've been privileged to watch it. So thank you, Sherry and Lacey, for sharing your insights. So again, thank you for attending. we'll launch that ebook and more on strategic scheduling coming forward. So thank you for joining us.